Hello and welcome to Views on News. I'm Jawad Tehami. Pakistan, which contributes less than 1% in the carbon emissions in the Earth's atmosphere, remains to be one of those 10 countries which happen to be the most vulnerable to climate change and its impacts. Last year, we saw the devastating floods which damaged and destroyed the infrastructure, and also the economy incurred over $30 billion of losses. This particular flood also affected 33 million people. Over 1,700 people lost their lives also. Huge damages were rendered to the standing crops and infrastructure, including roads and bridges. At that very particular moment, we saw the United Nations launched two flash appeals to the international community to help Pakistan and in that particular critical time. And the United Nations Secretary General was himself over here to witness the devastation and the destruction caused by those climate-induced floods. And he said that helping Pakistan in this particular difficult hour was not the matter of solidarity, rather it was the matter of justice. This year around, we have seen that River Satluj is in high floods, and it has caused devastation in some of the districts in Punjab province, particularly in Bahawalpur. The authorities this time around were prompt in evacuating hundreds of people from the vulnerable areas. Also in other news, we have seen the Energy Policy Institute of Chicago University has released its annual Air Quality Life Index report, which says air pollution in Pakistan could lead to a potential reduction of up to 4 years of life expectancy. Now, this particular index, the Air Quality Life Index, actually quantifies the influence of air pollution on a life expectancy. The report also says that the entire 240 million population of Pakistan resides in regions where the yearly average of particulate pollution surpasses the guidelines which have been set by the World Health Organization. In today's program, we will be discussing Pakistan's vulnerability to climate change and its severe impact, particularly on the economy and the lives and the livelihoods of the people who happen to be vulnerable, and what should be expected of the international community in this regard. What had been the response, especially when we talk about the United Nations launching two flash appeals, and also regarding the loss and damage fund, which was spearheaded by Pakistan and its diplomatic apparatus at the international level, and what Pakistan needs to do regarding dealing with the climate change and its adverse impacts. Also, when we talk about air pollution, what are the causes and what needs to be done at home to deal and address this particular problem. Also, for that, we are honored to have been joined in the studio by Mr. Waqar Sherazi. He is expert disaster response. Mr. Waqar Sherazi, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. And on Skype, we are being joined by Mr. Ahmad Rafay. He's environment lawyer. Mr. Ahmad, thank you very much for your time also for being with us on Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. Mr. Sherazi, let me start with you. Now, this particular report, let's begin with this particular Air Quality Life Index report that has been released by University of Chicago.
Yeah.
What's your understanding of the findings? How concerning are these findings for Pakistan?
I think that climate change is the biggest challenges in our era in the world, affecting all facets of lives around the globe. With regards to Pakistan, we will have to understand that while we claim that we contribute less than 1% of the total carbon emissions of the world, we will have to be realistic on the other hand that we are one of the most exponentially growing nations in terms of population. And while we increase in terms of population, in terms of number, it means that more carbon footprints, more fossil fuel consumption, more agriculture, which again contributes in global warming and in pollution in many ways. It contributes in water table contamination it contributes, in pesticide use and rest of the things. So we'll have to look that this exponential growth of population will definitely cost us in terms of climate change. Moreover, our checks and balances are also responsible for this phenomena, since there are many vehicles on the roads without any particular checks by any of the government machinery, that how much emission or how much carbon footprint does a car create. So this is also causing us lots of the air pollution. And above that,
when we specifically talk about the particulate matter
Yeah.
in the atmosphere,
Yeah.
that makes the population of the country vulnerable.
Yeah.
Okay, so on the other side, we say that we contribute less than 1%
yeah.
in the atmosphere.
Yeah.
So what's the difference between the two?
The difference between is that the international standard is that there must be less than 0.5 microgram particulate in a 3 cubic meter air surface per unit time. But while we claim that our air quality index, it goes to near 500 in Lahore and Islamabad now as well, I think that amount goes 3 times more than the international standards, which again refers that these are heavily, densely populated cities with no control on fossil fuel emissions, and there is a certain ability of air to diffuse that effect which is created by excessive use of vehicles and non-maintenance of vehicles. Moreover, in Islamabad, particularly in Lahore, there is an adjacent industrial area within the cities, which and the chimneys of different small medium industries produce lots of pollution, which is directly emitted to air. And again, this is a problem for not only in Pakistan but within our neighbor country. Delhi is one of the most polluted, air polluted cities of the world. So what Chicago University has said now, that because of having this exponentially increased air quality index phenomena in Pakistan, means with its bad quality, it would definitely contribute in decreasing the average age. And the university has said that the average age decrease would be from 3.7 years to 4.6 years, roughly 4 years decrease in an average age of a human being would be observed in Pakistan. So I think that we'll have to control the fossil fuel emissions, especially in terms of vehicle and in terms of the industry, and we'll have to go for the renewable solutions of energy.
Right. Let me proceed towards Mr. Ahmad also. Mr. Ahmad, when we look at the statistics which have been shared by this particular Air Quality Life Index report by the Chicago University, what's your understanding of that? What these stats actually point towards?
For inviting me on the show and for PTV World to be hosting a show on climate change and air pollution. I completely agree with what Waqar Saab is saying about the impact, the health impact of air pollution. Air pollution is a public health emergency, not just in Pakistan and its cities, but in the entire region between Kabul and Calcutta. Most cities and the petrol they use in the cars and diesel is the main cause of this air pollution, and it's causing a loss of life expectancy, which is staggering for a non-industrial country. And while you're right, Jawad, in saying that Pakistan's not a high net greenhouse gas emitter, the point is for a non-industrial country to be having such a heavy burden of a non-communicable disease is a reason for alarm bells to be going off. We know, for example, that greenhouse gases cause climate change. And to get from 1.5 degrees of global warming to 2 degrees of global warming, only a half degree requires greenhouse gas emissions, most of which come from the automobile, the transport sector, the energy sector. Will entail the loss of approximately 150 million lives. And scientists are telling us that we will breach this 2 degrees centigrade global warming by the middle of this century. 150 million people are 4 times the number of soldiers who were killed in World War I and World War II put together. And most of these deaths are going to occur in cities in Asia and Africa on account of emissions coming from the transport and the energy sector. It is imperative for governments, not just in Pakistan, but in the region, to address air quality issues, to improve fuel quality, to transition to renewable energies, and to have a push towards electric vehicles that can reduce exhausts.
Right, Mr. Ahmad, when you talk about as compared to the developed nations, there doesn't happen to be much of industrialization in Pakistan. So, what do we understand of it? The main reason of this particular pollution in Pakistan's atmosphere, is it because of the quality of the fuel?
That's correct. We have several studies, one conducted by the UN Food and Agricultural Organization and the Punjab Agriculture Department in 2018, and then two studies published this year by the Punjab Urban Unit, which is a government-owned think tank and consultancy. All three of which point towards the transport sector as the major contributor to air pollution, followed then by the industrial sector and the energy generation sector. We have some of the dirtiest fuels available on the face of the earth in our automobiles right now. And while the government of Pakistan in late 2019 notified that the imports of petrol and diesel into Pakistan should be of a Euro 4 standard, there is still no mechanism to ensure that Euro 4 petrol is made available consistently throughout the country. You'll find very few petrol stations north of Sindh that actually have Euro 4 quality fuels. And we need to not just improve the type of fuels that are available in Pakistan that are imported, but we also need to upgrade our refineries. We've got 5 refineries, only one of which can refine to a Euro 4 standard. The other 4 must be invested in and must raise their standards so that the people of Pakistan can benefit from the long-term health repercussions of having better quality air resulting from better quality fuel.
Right, Mr. Sherazi, are there other causes other than this, the dirtiest fuel, that has been just mentioned by Mr. Ahmad?
I would reiterate my comment that with this exponential increase in the population, we need more food. And as Ahmad Saab has mentioned, that the topmost source is the automobile industry, and then the industry, and then the other one. The second most sector which contributes in creation of greenhouse gases in the world is considered as the agriculture, because as I have mentioned that the greenhouse emission is largely due to the agriculture activity as well, because it consumes lots of energy, lots of machinery, lots of pesticides, and lots of deforestation. So we will have to control our population, because with this number of population, we will be needing more automobile industry, more fossil fuel emissions, more transportation, more industry, and then certainly more agriculture. But besides that, Pakistan is not quickly opting for the renewable sources of the energy as well. As in Vision 2025 or Vision 2030, Saudi Arabia has decided that 70% of their energy would be coming through the renewable energy of solar panels. Despite being a fuel producing country, they have decided, and they have recorded a major shift in their policy. But despite being a deficit country in terms of fossil fuel, we are not shifting efficiently towards the renewable energy. I think that we'll have to have green solutions for the energy production, and that will contribute effectively.
Mr. Sherazi, this report talks about the two major countries, the leading powers, China and the US, both, right? Specifically talking about China, it says that significant strides since 2014. There was a notable reduction of 42.3% between 2013 and 2021. Does it mean that Chinese completely went towards the renewables?
I think that it would be a sweeping statement saying this, that the complete dependency towards the renewable solutions. But China has made a remarkable progress in this sector, and they are now constantly shifting from the cost the cost-intensive solutions or the environmental cost-intensive solutions towards the renewable energy solutions. They have made very large solar parks, and for rest of the industrial uses, they are also producing the renewable energy. Meanwhile, America withdrawn from a pact previously, and then they again signed it that they will be playing their role in reducing the overall emissions throughout the world, and to keep the international global increase in the average temperature from less than 2 degrees centigrade. So I think that China's progress in this regard is commendable, despite that they are a growing nation, despite that they are an industrial country, despite that they are producing lots of goods for many economies of the world. They are positively shifting towards renewable sources of energy.
Right, Mr. Ahmad, according to your understanding, as the report says that China got a notable reduction of 42.3% between 2013 and 2021. What did exactly the Chinese do to achieve that?
I'm not too clear on exactly what the Chinese have done, but I do understand that China has focused on investing in renewable energies, desulfurizing and reducing its coal-based energies, and investing very heavily in public transport and electric vehicles. And these things are very easy to say, but they're very expensive to finance. And one of the things China has done is reached out to the private sector, to the financing available there, and has started things like green loans, green stock exchanges, green insurance, and a whole ecosystem of green financial services that can support the investment of private sector money into renewable and more sustainable and resilient technologies. In Pakistan, we have submitted to the United Nations our nationally determined contribution to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions or to mitigate them. Essentially, what that means is to investing in renewable energies by 2030. And the price tag of getting up to 40% of our electricity from renewable resources is in the range of approximately $196 billion by 2030. Now, Pakistan just does not have that money right now the government of Pakistan just doesn't have that money to be able to do so, especially in the face of the $30 billion loss it suffered on account of the floods of last year, and then of course the IMF program that it's involved in right now. And so I think Pakistan can learn from China's example by leveraging the money in the private sector, by attracting it through green loans, green financing, because this money is crucially important, and it also points towards international financing. In our nationally determined contribution submitted to the United Nations, where we pledge to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 40%, we say we'll do 15% of that reduction on our own resources, but the rest of it must come through international financing. This is not a begging bowl proposition, because the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, while it speaks of mitigating greenhouse gases for big countries and economies and adaptation for less developed countries, also includes the underlying promise of global finance that will move from the global north to the global majority, ensuring that people in less developed countries, the economies of less developed countries, have the financial resources to be able to prepare themselves and their populations from the impacts of climate change.
Right, Mr. Ahmad, now talking about the US, when it comes to the laws and the regulation, when specifically we talk about air pollution problem here in Pakistan, are there any specific laws that can actually make us address this particular problem?
In all four of our provincial environment protection acts, the environment protection agencies have notified air quality standards, not just for ambient air, which is outside air, and industrial gas emissions, but we also have standards for automobile exhausts, which currently rest at something called the Pakistan 2 standard, which is just underneath Euro 2. This can be upgraded to Euro 4 through a notification, and also by statute, each of the environment protection agencies has the power to be able to inform all of the automobile industries to install such pollution control devices or to use such quality fuels as may be necessary to ensure better fuel quality. But I note to date, none of the provincial environment protection agencies or the federal EPA have notified any sorts of instructions regarding air pollution technologies in automobiles or better fuels for automobiles.
So what needs to be done in that regard?
Well, we need to upgrade our refineries so that they can produce the necessary Euro 4. We need to ensure that the Euro 4 that we're importing is well distributed throughout the country. We need to have better vehicle testing services, because it doesn't mean anything if you get Euro 4 and put it into a 40-year-old Bedford truck. We need to have, especially for our large goods vehicles and our public transport vehicles, a motor testing facility so that we can ensure that these cars are operating at a maximum efficiency. Beyond this, we need to invest in electric vehicle technology, specifically in public transport and in two-wheelers and motorcycles, because they can be a huge, most of the automobiles in Pakistani cities are motorcycles and public transport vehicles. It's only the minority automobile elite, the four-wheelers, that we think about most of the time. But if we can make a transition to shared battery motorcycles and shared battery public transport, I think there will be a massive difference in the quality of air in Pakistan.
Right, Mr. Sherazi, as per your understanding, what's required for the enforcement of the concerned standards and the laws which are present?
I think that directly moving towards Euro 4 standard is not a practical solution for Pakistan. While the Europe say for example, the Germany says that by 2029, they would be a net zero carbon emission country in the world, and 100% of their vehicles would be electric vehicles. But the lithium batteries would be manufactured from the lithium which would be discovered from the mines of Chile, which is the largest source of lithium in Europe. And it is quite strange to understand that 70% of the fresh waters of the Chile is in control of the private ownership of different industries. So the lithium processing is a water intensive activity, and it has been estimated that to produce the lithium batteries raw material of Europe, about 70 to 80% of Chile's fresh water would be consumed, and it would be then shifted into polluted water, which would not be usable for human beings, which would be injurious for the water table beneath the surface and rest of the things. So I think that there is a joint responsibility for the developed countries of the world that they should not make third world as a dump yard of their used machinery in terms of vehicles, in terms of computers, in terms of mobiles, in terms of tablets, and in terms of rest of the electronic things, which is currently the case. In terms of Pakistan, we have observed that all the used vehicles from Japan and rest of the countries were openly permitted to be imported in Pakistan, which was, I think, not a healthy decision. And there is another side as well to it, that our neighbor country India, they have created the world's or the Asia's largest plant for creation or making of the solar panels. In Pakistan, we have not observed any such activity so far. So with these measures, without these measures, we cannot expect more, because directly shifting towards Euro 4 would directly translate into shifting the direct burden towards masses. And Pakistan masses are not in a position to take further burden for driving their vehicles. It will definitely affect the automobile industry, the transportation sector, and the lives of common people in Pakistan. So we'll have to have the efficient methods towards the renewable energy solutions by the state, by the government, because much of the responsibility lies with the policymakers, not with the masses.
Right, you just gave the example of India. Now we talk about New Delhi. It has been titled as the world's most polluted megacity.
Yeah.
Right. Although India has gone for solarization.
Yeah.
In the region, we see Bangladesh also being titled as the most polluted country.
Yeah.
So industrialization happens in this region. Industrialization happens in Europe, in America also. Why this particular region is the most vulnerable as far as air pollution specific is concerned?
Nepal, Bangladesh, India and Pakistan constitutes 25% of the population of the world, and it has a direct relationship with their carbon emission, because human being requires certain amount of energy for their transportation, for their goods need, for their food needs and rest of the things.
That
So-
is exactly my point.
Yeah.
The people in Americas as well as
Yeah,
in Europe also require
yeah,
agriculture, more food and more energy.
definitely. But
So why are they
there
less
are two
vulnerable?
differences. There are two differences. You know that in America, the per person provision of water is highest in the world. I think it is 400 liter a person in the world, which is never provided for any country or for inhabitants of any country in the world. Why? Because they have on one hand controlled their population, and on the other hand they have water reservoirs for even the rain does not happen for next 10 years. America has sufficient water reservoirs for them. So it is all because of planning, and there was a time when Queen Elizabeth was to inaugurate the famous ship that is Titanic, and there were many of the flowers besides her, because the river, what was the name of United Kingdom's river, was so polluted that the
Thames?
Thames, the river Thames was so polluted at that time because of the industrial waste that it was not possible for the Queen to go without, she was encircled by flowers from everywhere. But it was their industrial time and they have learnt. Our learning curve is more linear, since we do not have resources, but we also lack on planning juncture as well. Because in terms of implementation, we are a bit too loose. We have policies. We understand that we are not contributing more into the total carbon footprints of the world because we are a non-industrial country. But on the other hand, we are growing in terms of population. Our air conditioner consumption, which emits greenhouse gas, is exponentially increasing in Pakistan. And our deforestation as well, our timber requirement for the housing sector is exponentially increasing. So I think that growing population is one of the largest challenges for third world countries, which is moving them more towards the climate-induced calamities and climate-induced problems.
Right, Mr. Ahmad, again, this similar question to you also. When we speak in the perspective of regions, why this South Asian region remains to be more vulnerable as compared to the others, especially the Europe and Americas?
Well, I'll point out that there's no region on Earth that isn't susceptible to climate change. We've seen forest fires in Hawaii. The forest fires in Canada have caused air pollution issues in North America, including New York, just this year. We've seen forest fires in Greece, off the coast of Sicily. We've seen flooding in Beijing. We've seen flooding around the world, including Pakistan. Over 50 people lost their lives in Balochistan last month, and over 100,000 are affected in Lower Punjab just this year. There is no safe amount of climate change. The reason why countries are more vulnerable to climate change is because they don't have the ability to bounce back after a climate event. And that essentially can be tied down to their GDP, the amount of money they have in their economies to be able to help their people and populations and economies to get back onto their feet. Now, I remind you that the Pakistani economy is somewhere in the region of about $350 billion a year. And so last year's flood damages, which the World Bank calculated to be in the region of about $32 billion, was close to 10% of Pakistan's GDP. It'll become increasingly difficult for countries like Pakistan, especially poor countries like Pakistan, especially countries that are in IMF negotiations, to be able to leverage finances in a way that allow them to get back on their feet. And that's why we are vulnerable. It's not because we have some special sort of ecosystems or special vulnerabilities because of our terrain. It's because essentially we're a poor country.
Right. So we saw last year the United Nations Secretary General urging the international community to help Pakistan out, because it was not the question of solidarity or charity, rather it was a question of climate justice. So in that regard, the UN also launched 2 flash appeals the second of $816 million. So when we talk about climate justice, there is something that the international community, especially the developed countries, which owe to Pakistan. What's your understanding of that?
Absolutely. There was a study conducted last year by Imperial College London that determined that over 50% of the intensity of the rainfall in Balochistan and Sindh last year, and we're talking between 500 to 800% of monthly averages, that over 50% of that intensity was due to the 1 degree global warming that the Earth has experienced since the Industrial Revolution. In other words, the floods of last year were not a natural occurrence. They were very much a man-made occurrence, man-made by the economies and nations that have historically spewed greenhouse gases in their industrialization. And while the United Nations Secretary General did launch a flash appeal for Pakistan, requesting $800 million, I'll point out that by October of last year, only 11% of that flood appeal had been reached, and by January of this year, only $8 billion. By January of this year, a total of $8 billion were given to Pakistan, but not in the form of grants, mostly in the form of loans. And that is why Pakistan's loan portfolio, its external debt, is somewhere in the region of $125 billion right now. The international financial system is broken. Pakistan is one of many countries, poor countries, that is devastated by the impacts of climate change. And while there is money for fighting in Ukraine, while there's money for war in Afghanistan, while there's donations widely available for when Notre Dame gets burnt down, it appears that the global north has no empathy for the people of the global majority who are suffering the destruction that their economies have caused. There is something broken in the international financial system, and it is incredibly unjust.
Right. Can Pakistan take any legal steps on the international front, going to the perhaps the International Court of Justice regarding this when it comes to taking the reparations, or rather getting this amount in aid rather than in form of loans?
Well, Pakistan played a leading role last year at the Conference of Parties at Sharm el-Sheikh, where under the leadership not just of the Prime Minister of the time, but also our Climate Minister and Foreign Minister, Pakistan managed to lobby the international community to accept a loss and damage facility, a new form of financing in the United Nations climate world that will allow countries devastated by the climate crisis, devastation beyond any planned adaptation that they could have considered, finances that are available not in the form of loans, but in the form of money that will allow their economies and people to get back on their feet. I think Pakistan needs to leverage again its position as a sort of poster child for loss and damage at the international community, at the UN level, work with vulnerable countries, small island states, and less developed countries to form a bloc that can help push more developed countries into forcing them into reducing their greenhouse gas emissions, and also forcing them to make close to reparation payments. The problem with the word reparations is that it includes the word liability. And no first world country wants to admit the fact that it's part of the problem. So we've sort of come up with the phrase loss and damage. So that's one thing that Pakistan can do. As far as the International Court of Justice is concerned, there are provisions now, there are now initiatives seeking to petition the International Court of Justice to include ecocide, which is the wanton destruction of the environment, as a crime against humanity. And once that is done, then people and countries may be taken before the International Court of Justice for the type of damage that they're causing the earth and putting at risk future generations.
Mr. Sherazi, has been mentioned by Mr. Ahmad, the kind of flash appeal which was launched by the United Nations, a lesser of that was received by Pakistan. So pledges were already made by the international community and major powers. Why was that the case, despite the United Nations Secretary General witnessing firsthand himself the destruction, the scale of it?
Well, as Ahmad has said, that climate change is a global phenomena and no one is protected from it. But with regards to Pakistan, we will have to understand that on the diplomatic juncture, yes, we were very efficient and effective, that since the loss and damages were included in the France Pact agenda in 2016. But till then, it was not included in any of the COP conference agenda. And in Sharm el-Sheikh, Pakistan was the one who asked for inclusion of loss and damages in the international agenda of the conference, convincing the international community to understand what reparations are for the climate change and climate induced calamities which are faced by the third world countries of the world, especially Pakistan. But for how long would we be asking rest of the people on ethical grounds, since we have observed that the global community doesn't pay any heed to ethical grounds. They are there for their cosmetic appearance, but in terms of Ukraine, as my colleague said, that they were raising, there was a call for $400 billion for the rehabilitation of Ukrainian crisis. And the number of people affected in 2022 floods in Pakistan were more than the number of people affected by the war in Ukraine. But with this regard, we were having only $800 million pledges or $10 billion pledges. And as Ahmad has said, that only 11% of that matured. We'll have to understand that international community is no longer ready to understand their role on their ethical grounds. So what we have to do, we'll have to be more efficient with our policies and with our procedures. The 2022 floods was also because of the climate induced was also a climate induced calamity, but we have cultivated some of the flood drains which became one of the largest reasons of the spillover of the water, and many of the rural areas were submerged by the water. So had there been a clear infrastructure and a clear role of the community and the government machinery, that you are not allowed to cultivate in the flood drains, the situation would not be that severe which we observed in 2022. So there are two parts: our indigenous role, which is again compromised, but the international community is also compromised on the ethical grounds, but we should not expect more from them.
So how to address this problem of when there happen to be more rain in India, it releases the water towards Pakistan, it comes downstream. We've seen devastation happening in various districts in Punjab this time around because of the flood in River Satluj.
Coincidentally, the diplomatic relationship between the two countries are not good. As per the Indus Basin Treaty, India has to maintain a minimum 19% flow in rivers Satluj, Beas and Ravi. But we have observed in last 3 decades that India failed to maintain that treaty in terms of releasing minimum even 19% water in the downstreams of Satluj especially. So you can see that all the area of Satluj downstream, that is Bahawalnagar, Bahawalpur and Kasur and rest of the area, it turned into a mini desert. And this water, which was, India has no other option to release that towards Pakistan, it was a challenge as well as an opportunity for Pakistan, because this water contributes in the beneath the surface water table recharge, and it also contributes into increasing the reservoirs and in rehabilitation of the microclimate which is created by the river streams in many of the areas. But coincidentally, since our population were sowing the river beds, since there was no water in the rivers from decades and there were lands within the rivers, they perforated some wells in the river beds, and there were inhabitants in the river basin area. So it had to be submerged by the floodings. It was not even flooding in the river basin, because river basin is meant for water, not for the cultivation.
Right, that's one aspect of it. When we talk about, you already mentioned this release of water from India was a challenge and opportunity at the same time for Pakistan. So talking about challenge, how was it a challenge for Pakistan? Opportunity, you have already explained it.
Yes. The challenge was that since the diplomatically both of the countries do not enjoy good relationship, India had a chance to intimate Pakistan well in time before release of water. And once again we have observed that.
So what does the concerned treaty say about it?
The concerned treaty gives a particular time. I do not have the number of days, how much time that one country has to provide notice to another country, but there are some ethical aspects to some human aspect associated to release of water as well, because both of the countries know that from decades there is no water in downstream. So India has a humanitarian obligation to inform Pakistan well before time of release of water. But coincidentally, it was not the case. And then it translated into a delayed call for evacuation. But in this regard, Pakistan showed a remarkable progress by efficiently evacuating people and their assets from the area. And we have observed minimum losses in terms of 0 lives, and in terms of 0 lives taken by the flood, and in terms of minimum loss of assets.
Right, Mr. Ahmad, when we talk about the early release of water from India towards Pakistan because of more rains over there in their northern areas, is there any specific thing the Indus Water Treaty says about it?
As Waqar Sahab was explaining, the Indus Water Commissioners are to remain up to date about water flows. And my understanding is that the Indian Indus Water Commissioner informed Pakistan of the devastating flooding that was taking place in the Himalayas in India, which has caused scores of destruction in the mountain areas over there, as well as in parts of Punjab. I also understand that last month Pakistan extended its diplomatic hand by opening barrages on its side so that it could receive flood waters and prevent further flooding on the Indian side, something that was acknowledged by India, but something really that Pakistan and India should take up on the diplomatic side. Look, rivers will flood, and I agree with Waqar Sahab that it is poor governance that allows the administrations, it allows for people to cultivate and also build settlements in floodplains. Rivers are known to flood. And in the age of climate change, when we are uncertain about the unexpected and unprecedented changes in things like monsoon patterns, it only makes sense to ensure that people are not having settlements in floodplain areas. Although I also agree with Waqar Sahab that this year the Pakistani disaster management authorities, especially in Kasur and Bahari, have acted proactively and have taken many people to safety so that they can protect against the loss of life and the loss of property. But let's not forget that this flooding wasn't just because India released water, but because there was devastating flooding on the Indian side because of climate change as well, something that most countries are experiencing.
Specifically talk about the settlements, the authorities ensuring not to allow people to have settlements in these vulnerable areas. What needs to be done in that regard?
Stop making housing schemes in riverbeds like the Ravi Urban Development Authority. It's right in the middle of the Ravi floodplain. It's over 100,000 acres. It's absolutely bonkers to think that property developers completely ignore climate change when the risks are quite apparent for everyone.
Your take, closing comments.
Where does the requirement for housing comes from? From exponentially increasing population. And then our rules and regulation will have to stop the construction giant in Pakistan, will have to stop the giant of housing societies in Pakistan by effective regulations and effective policy making.
Okay, that's one aspect. So what about cultivation?
Cultivation, in terms of, it is again a catch-22 situation. For this 240 million population, your cultivable land is shrinking each day. So you have a catch-22 situation in this scenario as well. If you stop people from cultivating the riverbeds, your food security is compromised. So we'll again have to understand that which option we have to adopt from these trade-offs.
So which one is going to be the ideal?
I think that we'll have to stop people cultivating from the river basins, but on the other hand, we will have to go on increasing the yield from our cultivable lands, and we'll have to put a bar on the exponential growth of population.
Mr. Waqar Sherazi, expert disaster response, thank you very much for joining us in the studio. We really appreciate that. On Skype, we were joined by Mr. Ahmad Rafay, environmental lawyer. Mr. Ahmad, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's show. Thank you for watching.